Zoe Daniel, welcome to the program.
Morning, David.
So how chilled are you at the prospects of a second Trump presidency?
Look, I don't know about chill. I think we need to be prepared, but we also need to simply accept that this is probably going to happen and find ways of dealing with it. It's interesting to see Rudd and Hockey there. Remember back in the day they used to appear on TV together on morning television, I'm sure you do, and they're friends. You know, they know each other. And I would argue actually that during the previous Trump administration, it was Joe Hockey who was the key to accessing Trump. So I think it's notable to see Rudd there talking to Hockey, because I think that Joe Hockey might be quite critical in the mix, because, you know, when I was covering the White House back in the first Trump administration, I sort of described it as all the pickup sticks being thrown up in the air. All the normal pathways for media, for diplomats, for governments no longer existed. And there was a reinvention that was required. And I think the only thing that's predictable about Donald Trump is his unpredictability. And we have to just go into it knowing that and accept that things will be different.
And do you think this is a good thing that Kevin Rudd and, to that extent, Joe Hockey are doing to send these overtures, build these relationships with the Trump team?
Well, you've got to be pragmatic. You know, you have to find ways of having these conversations with Trump, really. At the end of the day, Trump does the hiring, Trump does the firing, and Trump does the signing off and the decision making, and it can be very mercurial, if I could put it that way. Difficult to know what to expect, and you need to be able to get to him, not just to his teams, to the president potentially himself.
Nonetheless, what are your concerns about what a future Trump presidency might bring?
Look, I have a range of them. I think that, you know, it'll be back to sort of where he left off after his first administration. I think anyone who thinks Trump has changed as a result of the assassination attempt is living in a parallel universe. We saw, for example, his rhetoric about winding back NATO. We saw him wind back Barack Obama's initiatives on renewable energy. We saw him pull out of Paris. We saw his unmatched power to reach people in a communication sense and to manipulate public opinion. So all of those things, I think, will be back to Trump Mark 1. I think, too, though, that we have this critical point where, because of the weakness of Biden, there is the possibility of a Senate and House changeover, and then that check and balance on Trump will be lost.
Do you think Joe Biden should go?
Well, look, I'm not sort of in the business of giving advice to a US president, but, you know, and I don't need to. I mean, I think that anyone who's observing this would say he probably can't win. I think the chances of him winning are next to nil. The thing is, though, and I've been thinking for ages, way before the debate, that Donald Trump would probably win the election. You know, he's quite extraordinary as a human in his ability to persist. But the thing is, who do you put in now who can beat Trump on the time frame that you have? And I don't think the Democrats can win it, Biden or no Biden.
You mentioned what might happen with NATO. We know Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, is a critic of US military support for Ukraine. He wants to draw that down. Does that concern you about what that might mean for the war in Ukraine?
Well, I think it's just really concerning from a broader geopolitical point of view. If the Americans in effect dump Ukraine and that gives the Russians open entry into Ukraine, what does that mean for the rest of Europe?
So you'd like to see that military support continue from the US for Ukraine?
Well, I think it's a barricade against a whole lot of unintended consequences, which is to do with the precipice on which the world finds itself in regard to the fragility of democracy and Ukraine really being the sort of pressure point to retain that democratic position across Europe, but also with the very febrile situation in the Middle East. I think the Americans pulling out of Ukraine could be quite disastrous.
Should the US then also continue military support for Israel?
Well, look, I think my views about the situation in Israel and Gaza are pretty well known. I'm not a fan of the Netanyahu government. I have spoken very strongly about the safety and security of my community in Goldstein, Jewish people who are very frightened. And from that point of view, the Hamas terrorist attack achieved its aim, which was to terrorise people. But I think there needs to be a ceasefire in Gaza and the parties need to come to the table for the sake of a two-state solution, but more broadly than that, for the sake of regional peace. Once this spills over in a big way into Lebanon, the Iranians get involved, and that's where you get that Russia link with what's happening in Ukraine. That's when things begin to potentially spiral out of control.
Do you think it would help if Australia were to recognise a Palestinian state? Would that help deliver a peaceful outcome?
Well, I've said that I support Palestinian statehood, but it has to be tied to a two-state solution. And I think that in some ways there's an opportunity for the likes of the Palestinian Authority right now to actually step up and prove that they can reinvent themselves to govern. The issue, I think, with declaration of Palestinian statehood currently, and obviously many countries have done it before us, but just the timing of it now, is that the situation is a complete basket case. There's no one there to govern. And you have to get those two parties to the table. The peace and security and safety of Israel and the Palestinians is intertwined. And one can't be safe without the other.
Yeah. Did you have just one more on this? Did you have a view on the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, on Friday ruled that Israel should abandon its occupation of Palestinian territories? It should pay reparations to Palestinians who've lost land and property. Is that something that Australia should support, that ruling, or ignore?
Well, I don't know about ignore it. I think have a close look at it. But, you know, Australia, certainly this government, has been fairly front-footed in regard to Israeli settlements in the Palestinian territories, for example. And I support the position that those illegal settlements should not be happening. That is absolutely inflaming the situation. But I think all of these things are part of that conversation that has to happen when you bring the parties to the table. I mean, getting back to Trump, you'll remember that he put Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband, in to solve Middle East peace, David, last time he was in office. So, you know, watch this space, because one of Trump's aspirations absolutely will be to end that war because he will see that as a win that he can chalk up.
All right, let's come to issues here this week. The CFMEU administrators will be sent in to help clean up the union. What about bringing back the Building and Construction Commission, the ABCC? You voted to abolish it. Do you think it now should be brought back?
Yeah, so just for the sake of clarity, I voted to abolish it within one of those massive omnibus bills that the government likes to do. So it was the industrial relations legislation that had a whole bunch of other really good stuff in it. And it was a difficult piece of legislation.
So did you think it should go or not?
I don't think it was particularly effective. So I didn't sort of have a strong view that it should stay. I think there's an argument that there should be something. But I think that the ABCC specifically has been so politicised that it's been impossible for it to be effective. That said, I'm not convinced that an administrator will be enough. I hear what your panel, particularly what Raf has said about that. Maybe it'll be enough. I actually think that it probably needs to be coupled with a police, maybe a state federal police task force. So to look at those criminal allegations, dismantle what's there, and then, OK, there needs to be representation for workers in the construction sector, obviously, but the toxic elements of the CFMEU absolutely have to be cleaned out. And so maybe it's an administrator and a police investigation piece, and then a form of watchdog as well. But, I mean, for people in Victoria, David, who've watched, the big build and the Westgate Tunnel and all these sorts of things that just take years with billions of dollars of cost blowouts, I think were just shaking their heads this week. Everyone's known to some degree that it's been going on, and it does feel like it's been convenient to turn a blind eye, and it is now Labor's problem. There's risk, and they have to resolve this.
Look, I wanted to ask you, there's been some question just finally here around what the Teal platform will be at the next election. Last time you had Scott Morrison to campaign against, he's not there this time. And some of those issues that you campaigned on, Labor's moved on: climate change, transparency, integrity and so on. What will be the pitch this time?
Well, two things. There is no Teal platform.
Your platform.
Teal's a media construct, and independents operate individually. Secondly, has Labor really moved on a lot of those things? I mean, they've been sort of pathologically unambitious on pretty much everything. Not enough action on climate, sort of, giving with one hand, taking with the other in terms of new fossil fuel developments and squibbing it on environmental reforms. And then from the point of view of the opposition, what's changed since the 2022 election? What's changed in their climate policy? If anything, they've walked it back. What's changed in regard to gender equality, safety of women, women's economic empowerment? And that goes to unions as well, by the way, because the vast majority of union members in Australia are women. And accountability and integrity, whistleblower protection, the effective working of the NAC. We have a NAC. I'm not convinced it's really doing much yet. So what's actually changed? The pitch is you need independence to make the government more ambitious and to make the opposition more ambitious, to make them better, to keep them honest, to make them strive, to provide vision for the country, particularly in an environment where you may well end up with Donald Trump leading the United States, going down a path of isolationism, nativism, and division. And we can make a decision as a country not to do that, to differentiate ourselves with a vision for our future. And I'm looking for that from both major parties, and I'm not seeing it.
But listening to what you've just said there, if we end up with a hung parliament, the Liberals haven't done anything much, you reckon, over the last few years. You'd like to push Labor further on various things. It sounds like you'd have to support a minority Labor government than coalition government, yeah?
Well, I'm not going to make a decision on that, 8 months before an election. And I'd like to call it a balanced parliament rather than hung parliament. Let's get away from the negative language. The crossbench is there to make that parliament function more effectively, and I think that's working. And let's see whether they can do better with the policies they put on the table between now and early next year.
Zoe Daniel, thanks very much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, David.